Dyslexia Awareness Month, and this in a way is just a little taster session where we'll be sharing some information for parents about dyslexia, and in a way it's sort of, we'll be probably spending quite a bit of time signposting resources and sources of information that you after tonight can look to or look through in terms of getting information about your child or young person. My name is Donald Dewing. I'm the Head of Education and Policy with Dyslexia Ireland. My background is teaching and educational psychology. I'm joined in the background, ably assisted by my colleague Maria Jones, who will also be chipping in as we get to the question and answer session in the second half of this evening. Once again, for people just joining, apologies for the slight delay. We obviously omitted a passcode, which should have been sent out to you. So mea culpa. I'm entirely responsible for all the admin around this, so I take the blame fully on. Okay, without too much further ado, we will maybe get started. I can see there Maria's just popped a link in to our Google Drive, where you will find a copy of the slides that I'm about to share, and they'll be available to you, and feel free to share those with colleagues or other parents who may not be able to join the session. Should also say that tonight will be recorded, and we will send a link to that recording to everybody, and that will also probably be on our YouTube page as well for people who can't make the session tonight. There's a QR code there also that will take you to a copy of the slides. You might be watching this in the car, on the train, with the sound down. So those slides are available for you through that QR link as well. In terms of other housekeeping, if there's any technical issues, hopefully not anymore, please put a message in the chat box. And if you have questions, which hopefully you do, you can pop them into the Q&A function at the bottom again. And Maria will try and get through as many of those as possible. What I would say is that we're expecting actually up to about 350 people tonight. So obviously we're very limited in terms of how much detail we can provide in terms of individual questions, but we'll certainly try and signpost you to anything that may be relevant. Okay, so I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, short presentation, and then we'll leave plenty of time. We're probably about 25 to 7 now, given the slight delay getting started, and we will have questions and answers after that. Okay. So just to say, we're recording tonight's session, and that will be made available to you. And we just ask, just in terms of there's some functionality now with AI that people can record their own things. We just ask if people might desist from doing that, and then we can make that available to you. It's a bit like going to the Take That concert where it's been videoed for TV, so you don't have to stand behind someone with their phone in the air for 2 hours, okay? Great. Okay, so a little bit about us first of all. We're a national charity for dyslexia and dyscalculia in Ireland, and we provide a range of services, including a website, social media, etc. We also have an educational psychology assessment service, which we provide assessments for both dyslexia and dyscalculia for children, young people, and adults. We do a range of lobbying and advocacy activities. This month particularly, we're very busy. We've been in the Dáil 2 or 3 times this month already, and we are on the radio and TV quite a lot, talking about dyslexia and advancing our campaigns to try to make school, education and society more dyslexia and dyscalculia friendly. You may be aware that we also run workshops after school around the country, and we have a very popular online project called the Readable Project, which is essentially an online book club for young people with dyslexia. What we do a lot of is training for teachers, for parents, for students, and also for other professionals. Most of that is delivered online these days, and we have lots and lots of interest in that. And we'll highlight the parents course that we have coming up as well at the end of this session. And of course, apart from children, young people and students, etc., we also link with other adults in the workplace and in wider society, and we deliver training and also consultancy, and we have a pilot coaching service at the moment as well. So our vision is to try to make Ireland and Irish society as dyslexia and dyscalculia friendly as possible, so that individuals with dyslexia and dyscalculia can reach their potential, and we try to do that by providing information, support services, advocacy, etc. Tonight, broadly, is part of that as well. So very quickly, I'd like to talk about what dyslexia is. And tonight we'll probably not be talking much about dyscalculia, but it may come up in the questions. We're broadly talking tonight about what dyslexia is. And sometimes when we talk about what dyslexia is, we're also talking or clarifying what it isn't. So we know that it's a different way of learning, and it affects education, both at primary, secondary, tertiary, and it also affects work, and it affects participation in all facets of society. And broadly, it's about 10% of the population. Some people are mildly affected by dyslexia and some people more severely. And we talk about a spectrum or a continuum. So if you know someone with dyslexia, you don't really know exactly how much it affects them just by knowing they're dyslexic. So the dyslexia is often described as an umbrella term which covers a range of presentations. With understanding and awareness, with accommodations where we can work around a problem, with support where we can work on key core skills like reading and spelling, we know that people with dyslexia can achieve a lot of success in education, the workplace, and in wider society. We know that everyone's a bit different, as I said before, but there's some core difficulties with reading, writing, spelling, and also some cognitive underlying skills, things like working memory and processing speed that can affect dyslexia. So it's not just as simple as reading, writing, spelling. There are also some other sort of thinking and processing issues that present. But we know it's not a difficulty in general with learning. It affects very specific skill areas. So someone with dyslexia might have absolutely no difficulty whatsoever with oral and oral skills, general knowledge, intelligence, creative thinking, etc., etc. So the difficulties that it affect are quite specific. And traditionally we've talked about dyslexia being a specific learning difficulty because it's not a general or a global one. The impact of dyslexia can change according to the environment. And we're not really talking about climate change here. What we're talking about is how dyslexic you are in any moment really depends on what you're being asked to do. So if I ask a young person in my class to describe their holiday to Kerry at Easter time and to talk about what they did and who they saw and how they got on and who they travelled with and how much fun they had, that young person with dyslexia might have excellent storytelling skills, vocabulary, expressive language skills. But when I ask them to write about the same experience, they don't really do themselves justice on a piece of paper, or it's very effortful, or it's full of errors. So depending on what terms and conditions someone is asked to do something, then difficulties can present or not present. An example in the workplace actually would be if I ask a dyslexic person to chair a meeting, they might do that really well. But if I ask them to minute the meeting, that might be quite challenging for them, especially if they're trying to participate in the meeting at the same time. So that gives us a clue that what teachers do and how they make little changes and little differences can make a big difference to young people. We hear a lot about dyslexic strengths as well, and this is really important to get the balance between difficulties and strengths. However, being dyslexic by itself doesn't automatically bring strengths like creativity or problem solving or thinking outside the box. We do know that sometimes there are some byproducts of being dyslexic, because often young people in school have to work harder or have to be a bit more creative, so they sometimes develop alternative thinking approaches as a result of finding some of the more traditional approaches really hard. But it's important not to put pressure on people with dyslexia that they must have some skill, talent, or superpower, because for a majority of people, that's not the case. So it's getting that balance right between acknowledging strengths as well as difficulties, but not overdoing it too much. And we recognise, like all people, that 10% of the population that are dyslexic, there's a huge variety within that group. So it's important not to fall into stereotypes of what a dyslexic person can't do or indeed can do. There's a lot of variation within that overall term. Now, we're asked about this a lot. People would say, is it a dyslexic student or a student with dyslexia? Am I dyslexic or am I a dyslexic? So really what we would say there is, let's try and not get too hung up on exact specific wording. Some people generally prefer, I'm someone with dyslexia. Some people say, well, do you know what? It's part of my identity. I don't mind being dyslexic or a dyslexic person. So really there's a lot of variety about what preferences exist. So what we would say is if you're speaking with an individual or you're a young person or it's a kid in your class, we would say, go with what they're most comfortable with. And when writing a policy for a school or when putting something on our website, you'll see when we write stuff about dyslexia or dyslexic people, we use the terms interchangeably, just to reflect the fact that differences in preference exist. One of the things that we're really keen to avoid is people getting so nervous about saying the wrong thing that they don't say the word at all, or they whisper the word, which obviously is not the right approach. And the final bit about dyslexia in terms of a definition is it's actually a legally recognised difficulty, which is technically seen as a disability under both Irish and European Union law. So, and that's the sort of equalities legislation that you'd be familiar with, or discrimination legislation. And that's important because it protects people with dyslexia if somebody is acting against them because of their underlying trait. However, the word disabled or disability carries lots of different connotations, and most people with dyslexia, if you ask an adult with dyslexia, they probably don't consider themselves disabled in a more traditional sense, if you like. So it was important just to try to cover that, and you can see a lot of what we've talked about there hopefully is pretty familiar to most people. And we actually sat in a basement in a Dublin hotel many years ago and sort of thrashed this out, and a recent definition came out of the UK called the Delphi definition, and that was an academic study where many people who are experts in dyslexia were consulted as to what they felt was an accurate definition. And when we looked at the Delphi definition recently, when it was produced last year, we found that actually it chimed very much with our own definition. It's not a one-line definition, as you can see, because dyslexia is a little bit, it's nuanced. A line we sometimes say in the office, we sometimes talk about in our parents' course is, if you know one person with dyslexia, then you know one person with dyslexia. And that again reflects what we've talked about already, which is the idea that there's a lot of variation within that. And when I speak to teachers and doing the teacher's course, I would say, well, you might have had a dyslexic person in your class last year or last period, but this dyslexic person might present differently. And in terms of parents joining tonight, within your family, you might have more than one child with dyslexia, but you'll know that they present differently. And that sometimes is about boys and girls, sometimes it's about personalities, and sometimes it's about age and stage as well. So it's understanding that there is that variety and variation within that general kind of configuration. Now, we don't have time, lots of time tonight, to talk about all of these things in detail. Well, the next slide really sets out the things that were most commonly asked about by parents. It's not an exclusive list. Like our talent show competitions on the telly, it's no particular order either. But these are the things that we're regularly asked about. And as you can see when we go through them, we have links within this presentation. And if you click on the PDF, you'll be taken to the relevant page or website or video. And there's more information on our website and on our hubs and on our social media about this. So we don't have time to get in specifics tonight, but in our parents course, which is a 4-hour course delivered over 2 evenings, these are the sorts of topics which we unpack a little bit more and explore a little bit more. Firstly, we're asked an awful lot about how do I go about getting my young person assessed? What should I expect from school in terms of identifying dyslexia? What age, or what's the youngest age, is often the commonest question, that maybe we can start noticing that there's an issue, and when can we proceed to more formal diagnostic assessments. The link that you have there will take you to our assessment page, which is our own assessment page, but it also explains a lot about seeking assessments within the school system. If you're seeking a private psychologist, we've got guidance about where to go and who to go to, because there is a little bit of buyer beware out there. And we also we've got little videos about what to expect if you come to us for an assessment. And they're really designed to watch with your child or young person so they know what to expect. I think there's a line in those videos saying we're a friendly bunch, and I, hand on heart, can guarantee that the psychologists in our team and the assistant psychologists are really warm, lovely human beings. And we deliver an excellent assessment service, but we're doing it to make sure that young people have a positive experience. Another question we get asked a lot, and it's very understandable, is what can I expect in my son or daughter's class or school in terms of extra support? And that might be about extra support in the class, about the class teacher making adjustments to things like the curriculum or homework or tests. And it might also be that a young person in a school may access extra support from what we used to know as resource teachers or learning support teachers. And now that term that's used as special education teachers or SET teachers. And when there is support provided, Increasingly, schools are pulling together all the different strands of that support in what's called a student support file or a student support plan, and that explains what the needs are, how we're addressing those needs, and that's commonly shared with parents and guardians when they're meeting with schools to talk about progress in class. One thing we might all be familiar with is around May time or June time, schools may undertake some tests, whole class tests. They're commonly called the drumcondras because that's the name of one of the tests that a lot of schools use. Other schools use other tests which might be called the micra-T. So the micras or the sigmas or the drumcondras, they're often done in school. And that's done, it's actually the department asks schools to do that for second, fourth and sixth class in primary school, but most schools do it every year from first class onwards. And that's in order to get a sense of a general class or a general school level of attainment when it comes to reading and mathematics. In English medium schools, it's reading in English. In Irish medium schools, it's reading in Irish and English. However, though that testing and that procedure and that process can sometimes cause unintended stress if your young person is having difficulties. And it might not even be necessary if they find it really stressful or if they've just had, say, a formal assessment. So the guidance that that link takes you to sets out some examples where you may talk to the school about maybe a young person not taking part if the conditions are right. That testing was never intended to cause stress, and it's not particularly nuanced in terms of identifying dyslexic needs either. But we go into that in a bit more detail in our parents course. We also, people might be familiar with special classes, or there's a few special schools in the country that cater for the needs of severely dyslexic students who are really struggling with core reading and spelling skills. And these are colloquially known as reading schools or reading classes. They have very strict criteria and there's a process for applying for that. There's been some media coverage around these schools recently, and there's been some changes to the process of application. So you may have seen stuff on our social media about that recently. The chances are, if it pertains to your child or young person, and you've had an assessment, the psychologist would have talked to you about whether your young person or child meets the criteria for these schools. And even if they do, they're very much in demand. So sometimes there are not enough places for the people who want them. And even if you do meet criteria, some parents decide that it's not the right approach for them in terms of young person moving school in order to meet their needs. Also, the bottom line is for a lot of people joining tonight, there's nowhere near you that has a class or a school based on geography. That link will take you to our website, which sets out where the schools are and process around applying, etc. I'd say this may be a topic where we get a lot of queries from parents, from schools, from media, from politicians. There is a facility set out very clearly by the Department of Education where for some children and some dyslexic children, there is a facility to be exempt from the core requirement to study Irish. But that is very carefully controlled with what's a series of rules set out in government circulars. And there's a whole bunch of information on our website about Irish exemption. What we did a couple of years ago is we created a series of 4 very short videos trying to explain this in plain English, because anyone who's tried to read a Department of Education circular will know sometimes it's written in quite civil service language, not always the most accessible. So our videos that link would take you to set out the main kind of rules and regulations around this. It won't cover every single question you may have about exemptions, but we also have links to the government website where they have frequently asked questions and things like that. We're also asked an awful lot about technology, or what we probably traditionally have called assistive technology, but increasingly I think maybe this is the word technology, because what we found for dyslexic needs, then often it's basic stuff like laptops, like tablets, like speech to text and text to speech, which used to be really cool and really hard to operate, but now it's built into every device. And most of our kitchen gadgets use that sort of technology. So that's particularly useful. It's good for lots of people, but it's particularly useful for many dyslexic learners. And using laptops, word processing software, etc., can be helpful, not all the time, but sometimes in school for things like extended reading or extended writing. Technology can really help get around the dyslexic difficulties. There's also a financial scheme, which is colloquially known as the Assistive Tech Grant, which is different, but it's part of that general area whereby if your scores are very low in attainments, then there's a facility where you may be able to apply for some financial assistance to buy something like a laptop or an iPad. But that's not to be confused with the need for technology, which is just all children and all dyslexic children can and should access that in an appropriate way, depending on the age and stage that they're at. The link under the assistive tech there, that bit there, will take you to a bunch of short videos that we created in the last couple of years, which are all about 2 or 3 minutes showing how to use text-to-speech or speech-to-text in an Apple device or in an Android device or in Google Docs or in Microsoft Word. Stuff we're all familiar with, but often there's a couple of buttons that you need to turn on to make that work. The grant then, that takes you to the circular which sets out the rules for applying for that extra finance. You may be aware, if you've been anywhere near our social media or even anywhere near the radio or Oireachtas TV recently, that we've been campaigning for the last 3 years to try to get an extra time introduced to the scheme of accommodations that are available for junior and leaving cert exams. So we're often asked about those accommodations, and increasingly, currently we're asked what's happening about extra time. So there's some updates there about extra time, and then this link will take you to relevant information about how to and what the rules are about applying for exam accommodations for students at second level. And then finally, we have a bunch of advice going right the way through the education system to the scheme called DARE, which is a scheme where young people with identified educational needs or medical needs can apply for a reduced points accommodation when going through the CEO system for third level. It's quite a detailed understanding around that, and the DARE website is very good at explaining how that stuff works. It's basically connected to the CEO application system, and it's something that's relevant around about 6th year of secondary school. And irrespective of DARE applications or successful applications, if you and when you get to third level, college or university, there's a whole range of supports that you can expect when studying at that level. And often the rules around that are more relaxed and things like extra time are available more easily. Okay, I'm just going to take a couple more minutes to... Now again, you may have questions about any or all of those, so feel free to ask them when we get to the Q&A part. Again, I would say that often the questions are quite nuanced because they depend on your situation and your young person. So we'll do our best to answer in general, but it may be that you will like to follow up with us after tonight to find out more about the individual situation, or you may do your own research following our links and our suggestions, or indeed you can contact us about your own particular case as well. Apart from our own website, which is dyslexia.ie, we also have a couple of sister websites, and one of them is called dyslexiahub.ie, and that is mostly video-based resources where we go into more detail explaining a bunch of stuff. And you can see there the titles do talk about technology. That's where we have our short videos. We have something called Voices of Dyslexia that'll explain level. We've got a bunch of information for children studying at second level, and we've got detailed information about supports in each of the areas of the curriculum. We have a lot about emotional well-being, managing things like stress and anxiety, positive mindsets. We have got some advice for parents and guardians about how to talk about dyslexia and how to support a child's self-esteem and confidence and well-being. We also have hours and hours of structured literacy videos taking you from the very basics of reading and spelling with initial phonics through to more complex spelling rules and conventions. And those are all free, accessible, video-based resources. An example would be, this is our head of educational psychology. Some of you may have met Emma or watched some of her videos already. And Emma, for example, here is giving advice about how to talk to your child or young person about dyslexia. So these are the sorts of videos that we have on the hub, which again, we're trying to speak in plain English, avoid psychological jargon, and try to give practical advice about how to support your child around things that we commonly get asked questions about. The Voices of Dyslexia section of the hub as well is, I think it's very, very powerful. You can see here a bunch of faces. It does look a little bit like Game of Thrones for a second. But we've got a bunch of faces of people who very generously gave up their time to come into our office and talk about their own experiences of dyslexia. And you can see a range of ages there and experiences. Some people were diagnosed early, some people later in life, some people work as teachers, some people work as actors. But it's a whole bunch of people talking about their experiences. None of them are particularly famous or run restaurants or act in Marvel movies, but that's kind of the benefit of this. They talk in a very sensible, grounded way about the good and the bad, about being dyslexic. And that often can be nice to hear because it sounds kind of familiar voices talking about stuff in a nice, friendly, encouraging, but also not over the top happy clappy. It's kind of grounded, it's sensible. And I would say for a lot of parents, they have probably watched some of these videos and then maybe shared clips with their young people or said, look, you know, that person not much resonated with me, but when I listened to this particular individual talk about their dyslexia, it sounded like they were describing me. So we have a bunch of stuff there, and there's individual stories, and we've also got some compilations talking about specific things, specific topics. Other videos that we would just have some links to here. Some of these are produced, well, all of them are produced out with our own organisation, some from the UK, some American, some local. But a bunch of things that may be useful to look at. Most of these are on our YouTube page anyway, so we just suggest you might browse through these. The reason that video-based resources can be helpful, apart from you don't have to present a big page of text to your young person, is it can be something where just, you know, we've all got quite short attention spans these days thanks to social media. So these are usually quite short, focused, short videos trying to get across key messages. And particularly when speaking to our young people, instead of face-to-face, it might be something that you watch with your child or young person and then have a conversation about, or something you maybe, you know, suggests a young person watches by themselves and then can come to you to ask questions about. Finally, just before we take some questions, we have a course coming up, a more extended version of tonight, essentially, in November. So that starts on the 11th of November, which is a Tuesday evening, and that runs for 2 hours on a Tuesday the 11th, and then 2 hours the week after on Tuesday the 18th. There's a code there to link. This is not a sales pitch. I'm not trying to upsell, but if you are interested in hearing more about the topics or the kind of topics we've talked about tonight, then obviously a 4-hour course like this gives a lot more time to both for us to pass on information and also more time for you as parents or guardians to clarify information, ask questions and share ideas as well. The link there in the QR code, and also you can see it's on our website under courses.